Now, during the electricity cut, we had time to think a little bit, and of course many things came to my mind, but I forgot, and one thing what I would like to mention is about a poem of Adelbert. It was written in 1936 by Adelbert. Shoghi Effendi wrote the book with the same title, God Passes By, in 1944. Of course, he examined all the Bahá'í writings and did a real wonderful work with his book, which he gave to the believers for the 100 years of the Bahá'í faith. But Adelbert Mühlschlegel had also the idea with the same title. He wrote a poem about the history of the Bahá'í faith until 1936. Further on, he didn't know at that time. And the title was The Path of the Most High, or God Passes By. And at the moment, Mr. Rohani told me, dear Bijan, that this is a quotation from the Bible. It is in 2 Mose, this is Exodus in English. We German, we do not use this, we say the first and second and so on. Mose, chapter 34, verse 6. And this poem, unfortunately, was really never used in our family. I don't know why Adelbert never sent it to the Bahá'í world. All these wonderful books which the beloved guardian brought out, and he would have been so happy with a poem like this. But I wanted to mention it now, because now Günther and Dorothy and I, when we found this, we were so happy about it. And of course many things I didn't mention, because it's mentioned in the book Adelbert Mühlschlegel, his life and his work. And it is sein Leben und sein Wirken. And then there is from a poem of him.
Can you show the page?
Yes, I can show this. When there is the end of the poem of him, and all ways become free. It's one of his poems at the end. And Günther and Dorothy, they published now this wonderful book with all the poems which were available, but there come always more after this book came out. Some friends said, oh, I had also a poem, and so on and so on. And we know this.
So, let's go back to the...
To 19, yeah.
Before
I wanted to
1950 or something like that,
yes,
after that.
Even earlier. Because when my father was the secretary of the National Spiritual Assembly, which was formed in 1946, I think it was already formed. And there he became the secretary, and of course then he was the first one who got the messages of the beloved guardian, and we were always so excited. It was a real feast in our family when we received from Shoghi Effendi news. And there came the 5-year plan from Shoghi Effendi to Germany. It was a very difficult plan. We couldn't think about it. How do we do it? We haven't homes yet, and we have to build a Hasiratul Rhodes in Germany. This was something very, very great. In the meanwhile, one of my school friends became a Bahá'í, and she lived very close to me, and we did all the Bahá'í activities with the youth. We went always together to Stuttgart, and where we published the Bahá'í youth letter. We were running around with big table in the Mühlschlegel eating room, put the papers together and had another copy, and so on. Or we were reading at home, my mother and I, we were reading the Sonne der Wahrheit. This was at that time the publication which the National Spiritual Assembly brought out with subjects from the Holy Writings, the Kitabi Ikan, the gleanings, and this kind of things came out in chapters. And this all had to be collated, you know, because there were also mistakes. Now, until it could be finally printed, everything was done on the typewriter, on an old typewriter. My dear father had a very old typewriter of his father, and he had always instruments next to it because he had to repair this, he had to repair that. But the most important thing was, how does he get paper? For an NSA secretary who had to send everything 9 times or 8 times, he had to send it out to the other members of the National Assembly. For this, you had to give old paper. Now, there were, you couldn't collect newspapers. There was one newspaper, you wouldn't get much of it. You had to, if you found in your own home, which was not burned completely, where you found some big books, you know, heavy books, like, oops, like this. This is my magnifying glass. And he had to give his dictionaries, his encyclopedias, and so on. All these kind of things. This was a chapter of detachment. To get detached, but he needed the paper, but he had to get, which he really got only if he gave some other papers. So, especially books, when you got a little bit of better paper that he could make 9 copies with this black paper in between, coal paper as we called it, and if you made a mistake you had to go through all the 9 copies and to bring it at the same place again and so on. So my father got up very early in the morning, 4 o'clock, he was already at his typewriter and he did his work. No, he had to leave at 6 o'clock latest the house, walking to his Kodak. And then he came home at 6 or 6:30 latest. And I can imagine he was tired at that time. So, therefore, the most active time of the National Spiritual Assembly secretary was at that time in the very early morning, where you needed light. This was also something which you had to be very careful with, but this is the right thing. Now, I will would very much like to mention Hermann Grossmann. The later was he the first hand of the course from Germany, and he had a firm, and this had to do something with paper, and he had the opportunity to get paper, and he paid for a person in his firm that he typed the DIN A4 size little booklets with prayers, with hidden words, with tablets and so on. And this also was written with, I don't know, about 7 or 8 copies, which were sent to the communities here and there, and we had to copy it in one way or the other, one doesn't know. In any way, it was done something. And we all are very, very grateful to Hermann Grossmann that he, and his dear Anne, his wife, that he took care at that time that the friends got again the writings. Of course, my father collected also his books again from the publishing trust, which he put in the suitcases. And in the meanwhile, he, during the war, he took one of, from one of the friends. He didn't want to bring him into difficulties with his books. And he went to visit his sister in Eden by Oranienburg, and this is close to Berlin. And he brought her books, the Bahá'í books. It were cleanings and this kind of books which we had at that time. And she was very brave during the war when she was in danger with it, but then she became so short-sighted, or I don't know what I should say. She said, I studied these writings after the war, and she became very, very Christian at that time, as she thought. And she decided to burn these books. This was very difficult between my father and his sister then, when he heard this, that she did this. But we have new writings in the meanwhile, and he told her, this will not help to bring this faith to a halt. This faith will grow, and you will see it. She saw it to a certain degree. Now, finally, I come again to the year 1953. You all, when you know a little bit of Bahá'í history, you will remember this was the beginning of the 10-year plan. By the way, I should say, we built the Hasaratul Quds in Frankfurt at that time. It was in the center of Frankfurt. And we came also from the whole of Germany by hitchhiking. My friend, my school friend and I, we also went by hitchhiking to Frankfurt. That was our first time that we did this, but we got a little bit used to it by the time. Nothing happened. Then 1953, the 10-year plan started. This beautiful world-encircling plan. And the Europeans were asked to go to Stockholm, in a country which had no war. There was a big hall available. In other countries, they were all involved into the war. There were no halls or anything like that available. So, with great excitement started. We went, my parents went to their first big journey. And I was also present. And we went together by train and then by ship, and then we had our different places in Stockholm where we lived. And the first of this great continental conferences started with many hands, and whom we saw in the meanwhile also. Adelbert 1950, Hermann Grossmann was appointed as a hand, and 1951 was Adelbert appointed as a hand, of course. So we had them there, of course we all knew them, but now all the other hands came as well, not all 27, but many, many were present, and it was a great, great excitement. And then there was the call for pioneers, and I was so sad at that time, because I was a pioneer in the 5-year plan, but then I had a contract, so to speak, with the National Assembly to come to Frankfurt. There was the Hausrat and to help in the secretariat there. So that was, therefore I could not go there. I thought I promised this and I did this, and so this is now your task. That's the sacrifice you have to bring. And I went to Frankfurt. But in Stockholm, there was one young boy who went to the stage and offered to wherever he is needed. And this was our dear Rolf Haug. And Rolf, after the meeting was over, he came to Adelbert and asked him. And he said, he shall go to Greece. I think this was already when he went over, but it was clear that he should go to Greece. And he asked Adelbert, where shall I go in Greece? Adelbert said, go to Heraklion. And so our dear Knight of Bahá'í, Rolf Haug, he came in the year 1953, which the conference was in July, and he arrived in Athens on the 6th of October. And he went on, he met the pioneers, the Knights of Bahá'í in Athens for a short time, and this was at that time Amin Banani, Sheila Banani, and the little girl, Susan Banani. So these were the pioneers for Athens, the Bananis, and Rolf became the pioneer for Rhodes. This was separate.
For Crete.
For Crete. Crete belongs to the Dodecanese, and there was another island which received very soon in January 1954. This was Elizabeth Bevan at that time. She married Mr. Gol Mohammadi from Sweden later on, and we had just the great pleasure this year to have her as a visitor for a short time here in Rhodes.
She was Knight of Bahá'í for Rhodes.
She was the Knight of Bahá'í for Rhodes. So we had Knights of Bahá'í for Athens, for the whole of Greece, for the Festland, as we say, for the continent, for the inland, yes, and for Crete, for the island of Crete, and for Rhodes. They were separately mentioned in the 10-year plan. And two of them were now here visiting us, and even all three, because I remember a few years ago there came also Amin Banani with his wife Sheila. So we had them all as a visitor here. This was 1953. Of course it was a big plan in our side, and it really was. And there were quite a lot of goals under when circumstances allow, because the circumstances at that time did not allow the teaching work in the Eastern European countries, which were all under the care, most of them, under the care of the National Spiritual Assembly in Germany. Of course, some of them were under the National Spiritual Assembly of Austria, which was formed in 1957 only, so half a year before the beloved guardian passed away. This assembly could be formed. Yeah, then our whole thinking, our whole mind was always centered on the goals. We got the goals precisely from the beloved guardian. It had not to be done at that time by the national assemblies as it is now, because the community grew, the community became more adult. And we noticed how difficult this is to make a plan. And Shoghi Effendi made this plan for the whole world. But for how many national spiritual assembly we must think, if it is for the whole world? The 10-year plan was given to 12 national spiritual assemblies. The 12th one was just elected in 1953. It was the Italo-Swiss National Spiritual Assembly. And they immediately got on their shoulders a difficult plan. For instance, Rhodes was in their plan. It was under Italy, and I say Italy. They were just children also. So therefore, Elizabeth Bevan from America, she came because Italy said to America, we cannot do it, we haven't enough people. So America took over and said, we will help you. And so it was done.
So good.